The rain started before we even left town. Not normal rain either. It was one of those storms where the sky turns almost green and the roads look black under the headlights. I remember sitting in the passenger seat thinking we should just turn around and go home, but nobody wanted to be the coward. This happened back in 2011 when I was 18. There were 4 of us that night. Me, my best friend Ryan, my cousin Ethan, and a guy named Mark who honestly always gave me weird vibes. He was one of those people who never seemed scared of anything. The type of person who would smile during horror movies instead of looking away. The reason we were out that night was because of a local legend. About 20 minutes outside my hometown, deep in the woods, there was an abandoned psychiatric care facility. Technically, it wasn't a real hospital. It was more like a long-term treatment center for mentally ill patients back in the 1960s. At least that's what people said. Nobody knew the full truth because the place had been shut down decades before we were born. Growing up, every kid in town knew the stories. People claimed patients died there during a fire. Some people said experiments were performed underground. Others swore they heard screaming in the woods late at night. Every Halloween, older kids would dare people to drive up there. Most never did. The property was hidden behind miles of forest roads and old service paths. If you didn't know exactly where you were going, you'd never find it. Even worse, people said police patrolled the area because the property technically still belonged to the state. For years it was just another creepy story we talked about at sleepovers. Then Mark claimed he knew where it was. He told us his older brother had gone there years before and showed him the route on a map. None of us believed him at first, but eventually curiosity got the better of us. So around midnight, during one of the worst storms I can remember, we decided to go. The deeper we drove into the woods, the worse the weather became. The rain hammered against the windshield so hard I could barely see. Tree branches scraped the sides of Ryan's truck as we bounced along the muddy road. Every few minutes Ethan would nervously ask if we should turn around. Mark just kept saying, "We're close." Finally, after what felt like forever, we saw it. A chain-link fence appeared through the rain, half-collapsed and covered in vines. Behind it sat a massive concrete building barely visible in the darkness. Even from the road it looked wrong. Most abandoned buildings just look empty. This place looked dead. There were no lights anywhere. No sounds. No signs of animals. Just this giant black structure sitting in the middle of the woods while rain poured around it. Ryan killed the engine, and for a second nobody spoke. I remember hearing thunder somewhere far away while we all stared at the building through the windshield. Then Mark laughed quietly and said, "We actually found it." We climbed through the broken section of fence and started toward the entrance using our phone flashlights. The mud kept sucking at our shoes. The closer we got to the building, the colder it felt. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. The air genuinely felt colder near the structure. The front doors were chained shut. But one of the side entrances had already been forced open at some point. Somebody had pried the doors apart just enough to squeeze through. Inside smelled like mold, wet wood, and something metallic. The flashlights barely helped. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, covered in peeling paint and broken tiles. Water dripped from the ceiling somewhere deep inside the building. And the silence. That's what bothered me most. Even abandoned places usually make noise. Wind, animals, settling wood, something. This place was completely silent. We started exploring slowly. Most rooms were empty except for overturned furniture and graffiti. Some of the walls still had faded patient information signs hanging beside the doors. I remember seeing old wheelchairs stacked in one room covered in dust. At one point Ethan asked if anyone else smelled smoke. I remember laughing nervously because I thought he was trying to scare us. Then I smelled it too. Not cigarette smoke. Burning wood. Very faint, but definitely there. Ryan immediately assumed homeless people were staying there and suggested we leave. Mark disagreed. He kept wanting to go deeper inside. Eventually, we found a stairwell leading underground. The second Mark saw it, he smiled. "See," he whispered. "I told you this place had tunnels." I honestly didn't want to go down there. Every instinct in my body told me not to. But nobody wanted to stay upstairs alone, so we followed him. The basement level was worse than the upper floors. The air felt heavy down there. Our flashlights reflected off puddles along the floor, and several doors hung slightly open. One room still had rusted hospital beds inside lined up against the walls. Then we heard it. A sound somewhere deeper in the darkness. At first I thought it was pipes rattling. Then it happened again. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Dragging slightly. Every single one of us froze. Ryan whispered, "Did you hear that?" Before anyone answered, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence again. I remember staring down the hallway trying to see farther into the dark. My flashlight barely reached the end. That's when Ethan grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. He pointed toward one of the rooms. There was someone standing inside. At first all I could see was a shape. Tall. Thin. Perfectly still. Then lightning flashed outside somewhere above the building, and for half a second the hallway lit up brighter through the basement windows near the ceiling. I saw enough to know it was a person. Not a mannequin. Not shadows. A person. They were standing in the doorway wearing what looked like a hospital gown. Nobody moved. The figure just stood there motionless with its head tilted slightly to one side. Then Mark did the dumbest thing possible. He called out, "Hello?" The second he spoke, the figure stepped backward into the room. Not turned around. Not walked. Just stepped backward out of sight. Ryan instantly said, "Nope. We're leaving." Nobody argued. We started backing away down the hallway, trying not to panic. I could hear my own heartbeat. Ethan kept looking over his shoulder, like he expected something to appear behind us. Then came the sound again. Footsteps. Except now they were faster. Much faster. Running. Coming directly toward us through the darkness. We completely lost it. All four of us turned and sprinted for the stairs. Our flashlights bounced wildly across the walls while the footsteps echoed behind us. I remember hearing Ethan screaming. I remember Ryan slipping on the wet floor and smashing into the wall. And I remember one thing more clearly than anything else. As I reached the stairwell door, I looked back down the hallway for one split second. There wasn't just one figure anymore. There were three. Three tall silhouettes standing at the far end of the basement hallway, completely motionless. Watching us. We burst out of the building and ran through the rain back toward the truck. I could barely breathe. My shoes kept slipping in the mud. Ryan fumbled his keys twice trying to unlock the doors. The second we got inside, he started the engine and slammed on the gas. As the truck turned around near the entrance gate, the headlights swept across the front of the building one last time. And standing in one of the second-floor windows was a person. Completely still. Watching us leave. None of us spoke during the drive home. Not even Mark. Especially not Mark. About a week later, Ryan refused to talk about that night anymore. Ethan claimed we probably ran into homeless people living there. That explanation honestly made sense to me for years. Until something happened months later. Mark disappeared. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean actually disappeared. One day he was there. Then suddenly he wasn't. Police searched everywhere. His car was eventually found abandoned near the woods outside town. They never found him. No body.
No explanation.
Nothing. People came up with theories for years. Drugs. Running away.
Suicide.
But every time I think about him, I remember the way he smiled when he saw that basement stairwell. Like he already knew something was down there waiting for us. I'm in my 30s now, and the building has since been demolished. There's nothing left there except empty land and overgrown trees. But sometimes during storms, usually late at night, I still think about those figures standing silently at the end of that hallway. And honestly, I still wonder if only 3 figures were watching us because one of them was waiting for Mark to come back later.